Hey guys, so I really do not want to do this video. I'm going to share with you some very disturbing news about the SSPX organization. And like I said, I really didn't want to do this. I was hoping somebody else did, but apparently nobody's doing this video, so I'm going to do it. I'd much rather come to you with edifying, uplifting words. But I feel sometimes we need to know things to protect our families. And sometimes they're not pleasant. But I am going to start with some encouraging news. Before I get to the SSPX, I want to talk about the Catholic Church. And some of you guys have been watching me for years, know this already. I started my channel defending the church with a lot of this information I'm going to give you, but some of you may not have seen it and are still under the impression that the church is in a crisis. So the Catholic Church did have a major crisis. I mean, the worst crisis of the church ever. But that crisis is over. And that crisis was the sexual abuse of little children by Catholic priests. And it's one of the things that the devil would use to keep people from entering the Catholic Church and from making people leave the Catholic Church. So we have to have a clear understanding of what happened and why the crisis is over. The greatest crisis the church ever faced was over. And then I'm going to explain who the SSPX is, what their crisis is, and what's going on there, and why I'm sharing it with you. But first, I want to stick with the Catholic Church. So many of my Protestant brothers and sisters will use that against me when I try and convert them to Catholicism. And I just hit them with the facts. According to Dr. Cheryl Shakeshaft, PhD, she was employed by the U.S. Department of Education to do a study. She did a 10-year in-depth study. She hired 1,000 of the top researchers. Took 10 years. I mean, this is the most scientific study undertaken by anyone. And from 1992 to 2002, she did the study. She said there was 300,000 sexual abuse crimes committed in the United States public school systems by United States public school teachers. And in her own words, in her official report that you could Google, she said, our problem in the United States public schools is 100 times worse than the Catholic Church at the height of their crisis. So any child being abused by any adult is too many. And what these evil priests did, they all deserve the maximum penalty that we can give them. But the enemy uses that against the church like we're worse than anybody. Where in fact, society is filled with these pedophiles and they sneak into places, whether it's the Catholic Church, whether it's the public school system. It's not because the public school system is evil that there's pedophiles, and it's not because the Catholic Church is evil that there's pedophiles. So that pedophiles will go where they think they can have access to children. I'm going to tell you how the Catholic Church solved this problem and why the public schools can't solve the problem, and it's getting worse in a minute. But my Protestant brothers and sisters are not immune to this. In fact, Billy Graham, the Reverend Billy Graham, the late Billy Graham, one of the greatest Protestant evangelists to ever live, his grandson, who is a devout evangelical Protestant Christian, Baz Tejidovin, was a state prosecutor in the state of Florida, and he was in charge of the sex crimes unit in Florida. And then he went on to private practice where his expertise was in religious sex crimes. And he says, now this is him talking, I'm quoting him, our churches, Protestant evangelical churches, are 2 to 3 times worse than the Catholic Church is at their height. And I'm saying at their height because you're going to see in a minute that problem has been solved in the Catholic Church. And unfortunately, the Protestants haven't solved it yet. According to Baz Tijidovin, Protestant sexual abuse amongst children is 2 to 3 times worse than the Catholic Church ever was. And you see that right now, the Southern Baptists are going through it. Their leader a couple of years ago, Dr. Russell Moore, very conservative Southern Baptist, stepped down because he was sickened by the cover-ups he's seen in their church. They were making the same mistakes that our bishops made back in the day, trying to cover up these crimes. And so he stepped down. And per capita, like if you take the size of the Southern Baptists compared to the size of the Catholic Church, their problem's like 5 to 10 times worse than the Catholic Church when it was bad. And like, again, I'm going to show you that crisis is over in the Catholic Church. And then, according to Baz Tijidovin, most other religions, Hinduism, Islam, they have the same crisis going on. They have the same crisis going on. Now, according to Jason Burry, he's the journalist that broke the crisis in the Catholic Church of child abuse, and they made the movie Spotlight based on his findings. And according to Jason Burry, the crisis is now over thanks to Pope Francis. Now, this is a liberal journalist that's critical of the Catholic Church, but he took an objective view, and he said because of the reforms of Pope Francis, and because Pope Francis is light years ahead of his predecessors in attacking this problem with transparency and safeguards, the sexual abuse problem in the Catholic Church is over. And according to the FBI, it's the safest place for children today. And I can attest to that. A lot of you guys know I was a milkman for many years. And when I would deliver milk to like a Baptist school, the door, I'd just walk right in. I have little kids opening doors for me in the hallway. I go to a Catholic church, Catholic school, and try and deliver milk. And I feel like I'm trying to enter Fort Knox. Gates, locks, you got to go through the office. You know, you got to have an escort. When I taught RCIA in the Catholic Church, how to get fingerprinted, and you could never be alone with children. I mean, so the Catholic Church reforms are working. But it's more than that. Now, Jason Burry, being a liberal journalist, won't tell you the full reason. I mean, that's a big part of, you know, the reforms that, FBI and law enforcement are praising and saying the Catholic Church is a model. Other organizations like the Boy Scouts are having problems. The YMCA is having problems. I mean, every organization is having problems. Fortunately, the liberal media always hates and always hated the Catholic Church, so they're going to put the spotlight on the Catholic Church. But like I said, according to law enforcement, the Catholic Church is the model to follow now to protect children today. But what the liberals won't tell you, and Jason Burry, being a liberal journalist, won't tell you, is one of the findings was this was a homosexual problem. And Pope Francis attacked this. In 2013, like he was a brand new Pope, one of the first things he did was excommunicate Father Greg Reynolds for advocating same-sex unions. Shortly after that, he told a group of Italian bishops, because of this child sex abuse, we have to be very careful not to allow homosexuals to sneak into the priesthood. See, up to this point, the church said, the church has always taught you can't be a homosexual priest. But we allowed them, if they were once homosexual, and they say, well, it was when I was young, I was attracted to men, but now, I've repented of that, and I hadn't had a same-sex attraction in years, and I'm committing to celibacy anyway. And then it was up to the bishop to test, okay, is this guy being honest or not? And it was up to the bishop. And they made a lot of mistakes, and a lot of homosexuals snuck in. In fact, most of them snuck in the 40s during the war. They were feminine men, and they didn't want to go fight for a country, so they pretended to be Catholic priests, that they wanted to be Catholic priests, but they were just homosexuals hiding out in the priesthood, unfortunately. This is what our investigations discovered. The Catholic Church investigated the sex abuse problem. Now, Pope Francis said to the Italian bishops, if they show a hint femininity, don't let them in. So he's actually made the process much harder for a homosexual to sneak in. And so what are the results? You know, I always say the proof is in the pudding. You know, show me the proof. Show me evidence. Did his reforms work? Well, I'm going to show you the evidence. Now, I believe this is just the United States, but it's pretty equivalent throughout the world. And a lot of times when the media, you got to listen to the media, they will talk about sex abuse and they'll make it sound like it's just happened, but it's something from like the 1940s and 50s. In fact, most of the abuse occurred even in the U.S. Department of Education. She says, you know, our abuse occurred in a 10-year period. From 1992 to 2002, 300,000 public school teachers abused little kids, sexually abused them. The Catholic Church, there was 10,000 from 1940 to 2002 when she concluded that study. And most of them, she said, happened between the 50s and 60s with priests that are dead now. So these were old priests. Most of the priests that did this are dead. So let's see. In the 1970s, there were 6,100. This is according to a Georgetown University research study. 1970s, from 1970 to 1979, I guess, 6,100. 1980s, 3,500. 1990s, 770. Oh no, I'm sorry. 1980s, 3,500. 1990s, 351. And today we'll go from, since Pope Francis has been Pope, 2012, 6. 2013, 7. 2014, 6. 2015, 7. 2016, 2. 2017, 6. 2018, 3. 2019, 8. And this book was written a few years ago by Bill Donahue, The Truth About Clergy Sexual Abuse. But I've recently seen a study in 2022, there were only 3 credible abuse allegations in the United States against priests. And it was, I think, the same priest, one priest. Compared to the city of Chicago, one city in the United States, the city of Chicago public school system had over 3,000 credible allegations against their school teachers. So 3 is too many. But the devil would have people believe that it's the Catholic Church, where it's way worse in other organizations, as I pointed out. The crisis is over. Now there's, you know, we're weeding out these bad priests, but the crisis overall is over. That's the Catholic Church. Now, for my Protestant brothers and sisters, you hear about the SSPX going on, and you throw that in my face. I would throw it in the Catholic's face when I was a Protestant too, so I'm not, you know, hating on you. But the way I can explain the SSPX, so just like as a Protestant, you know, you're a Baptist, a Presbyterian maybe, you believe the basic tenets of Christianity, the Trinity being like the basics. Well, the Mormon Church will call themselves Christians, but they deny the basic fundamental truths of the faith, like the Trinity. They'll say it's a Catholic invention, so they reject it. Now, the Catholic Church did define the doctrine at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, but the Catholic Church has always believed it. The apostles taught it. The Trinity's always been taught. We just didn't make it dogma till like 325, and then I think Constantinople, we pounded on even more, like made it more defined. But we've always believed the Trinity. So the Mormons will call themselves Christians, but Protestants don't consider them Christians, and Catholics don't consider them Christians. Now, I know a lot of Mormons, And they're some of the nicest people I ever met. Every Mormon I know is extremely nice, extremely generous, and great neighbors. They're just good, wholesome people. But their theology is from the pit of hell. So they would be called a Protestant cult. Not like a Jim Jones cult where they're controlling and they're killing you. It's just they don't believe the central beliefs of Christianity. Well, in Catholicism, we have some Catholic cults. And the SSPX would qualify as that, where they call themselves Catholic. And, they believe a lot of Catholic stuff. But what makes us Catholic and not Protestant is we accept the teaching of the magisterium and the Pope, and we have to assent to that. Well, the SSPX rejects our largest ecumenical council, the Vatican II, and they reject our ordinary Mass that 95% of Catholics go to. In fact, they tell people it's evil. They say it's intrinsically evil. Stay home. If you have a choice to go to an ordinary Mass or no Mass at all, don't go to Mass. So in the Catholic Church, we consider that a mortal sin. So they're teaching their people to sin. So we wouldn't call them Catholics. They're not in union with Rome. Kind of like Eastern Orthodox. They believe, all the sacraments like we believe, but they're not in union with Rome. Now, the way they started, and I'm going to get to their abuse problem in a minute here, but I want my Protestant brothers watching to understand that this isn't the Catholic Church where this problem's happening. So they started by a guy named Marcel Lefebvre, and he disobeyed Pope St. John Paul II when Pope John Paul told him not to ordain 4 men to bishops. He did it anyway. So he was excommunicated, and his organization, SSPX, at that point had no canonical status. So nothing they do is valid. A priest is always a priest, so their priest can give you the Eucharist, and the Eucharist is the body and blood of Jesus Christ, but the Mass is invalid. Their confessions weren't valid. Their marriages weren't valid. Now, Pope Benedict, when he came along years later, tried to reach out to them to bring them back in the union with Rome. So he got rid of the excommunication for their 4 bishops, but one of them got excommunicated again for ordaining priests without permission, ordaining bishops without permission from the Vatican. So that was Bishop Williamson, I believe. So, and Pope Benedict at the time said they still have no canonical status, but this is an act of mercy to try and bring them in so they would accept Vatican II and they would accept the new Mass. But until then, they'll have no canonical status. Then Pope Francis went even farther recently. He said, all their marriages, just think about it, all their marriages are invalid. So if you're like in SSPX and you were married, you're committing adultery according to the Catholic Church. Your confessions weren't valid. And Pope Francis reached out in mercy, and he gave the faculties back to the priest where they can hear confession and they can marry. And he said this is in hopes to bring them back in the union with Rome. They still have no canonical status. And Cardinal Burke just recently came out and said, SSPX has no canonical status. Their Mass is illicit. Basically, that's Catholic language for illegal. So, and again, like the Mormon Church, I'm sure there's a lot of good people in the SSPX, but their theology is from the pit of hell. So, the Mormon Church is probably the wealthiest church per capita. Catholic Church is the largest. We're the church Christ started. We've been around for 2,000 years, so we've had a lot of property and art donated to us, so we've accumulated a lot of wealth, although we're on paper, we have this wealth, but cash-wise, we're always in debt. We're not doing very well financially. But if you took our net worth, we'd be the wealthiest church. Now, the Mormon per capita for religious organizations, I wouldn't call them a church, religious organizations, they're by far by capita the richest. And the SPX is also very wealthy, extremely wealthy. The Mormons use their wealth when I talk to other Mormons to help each other out. They're like, yeah, I really don't believe that I could become a god. And that's a Mormon teaching that all Mormons could become gods. I really don't believe that, but I don't want to leave the church because if I do, I lose my job. I lose, they really take care of me. So they take care of their own with their money, and they kind of keep them in that way. Seems SSPX uses their money to buy influence. You have influencers that may not even technically be part of the SSPX, but they espouse their views that the ordinary mass is evil, and they may, they're always bashing the ordinary mass. Now, although the SSPX, unlike the SSPV and the Resistance, the group that Archbishop Vigano just joined, they believe the Pope is the Pope, that we have a valid Pope. So they're not sedevacantist. They just don't obey the Pope. they believe he's the Pope, but their influencers will say he's heretical, he's teaching heresy, he's a bad Pope, and they get people, Catholics, to hate him, and they hate the new Mass, and they'll use the Latin Mass as a straw man, and they'll say, they'll weaponize the Latin Mass. Oh, they're trying to take away the Latin Mass. They're trying to take it, and they make that the fight. Where the fight is, are you obedient to Rome? Or are you disobedient? So, just like with the left, the issue is never the issue. So that's that. And there is a crisis going on in the SSPX. They still have a sexual abuse crisis. It's been going on from the very beginning, and I'm going to demonstrate. I'm going to show you this. So, like, when I was in Jersey growing up, we used to always go to Manhattan. They would play these shell games, or 3-card Monte, and you'd be looking at one thing, and it'd be over here. And this is what these guys do. They have some Catholics deceive that there's a crisis in the church. The crisis, the greatest crisis in the church is happening now. They don't think the sexual abuse crisis was the greatest crisis for some reason. They don't even talk about that. They say the greatest crisis is we have a bad Pope, and he may be a heretic Pope. No. The greatest crisis in the church was raping little boys. There's nothing worse than that. If you say there's a worse crisis now, I would question your relationship to God. I really would. Do you even know him? But I'm getting off track here. They'll keep pointing out the crisis, and like everything the Pope says, they take out of context. And I've showed on here, these people literally lie about what the Pope said or took them out of context. And they have so many people hating the Pope. And this is how they have us focus on this made up crisis that they made up in the church, that we have a bad Pope, when they have a crisis going on of sexual abuse. And this is what I'm going to share with you. This just came out this week. Oh, and getting back, I almost forgot. First, let me stay on our church. So the bad priests, the majority of them, that pedophile priests, like 90% of them, were from the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And then they kept on their shenanigans and evil ways until they were caught or that they died. Okay? But according to a recent study now, right now in the Catholic Church, and all these guys were liberals, homosexuals are always liberals. Right now, according to an 18-page report issued by the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., said that when priests were asked to describe their theological outlook on a spectrum from very conservative, very orthodox, to very progressive, none of those ordained after 2020 described themselves as very progressive. Now, this is the Catholic Church. This is in the SSPX. These are Catholic, that are in union with Rome. They did the study with. The report included a graph showing that the proportion of priests who identified as somewhat progressive or very progressive fell almost 70% from those ordained in 1965 to 1969, pre-Vatican II, to less than 5% among those ordained in 2020 or later, 5% now. Researchers said there was a similar drift away from political liberalism and toward moderate and conservative positions. And you'll see that someone who is liberal theologically will always be liberal, will usually be liberal politically. And someone who is conservative religiously is usually conservative politically. And you see no difference with the priests. Simply put, the portion of new priests who see themselves as politically liberal or theologically progressive has been steadily declining since the Second Vatican Council and has now all but vanished, the report said. So pre-Vatican II priests were way more liberal politically and religiously. And that would explain why SSPX has this homosexual child abuse problem that they have. Because they're trying to go back to pre-Vatican II. They think Vatican II was evil. And they're telling the whole world, with their many influencers that are more popular than me on YouTube, that Vatican II is evil. The new mass is evil. Our Pope is evil. But the fact is this. This is the report I'm talking about right now. And none of their SSPX supporters are talking about on YouTube. You know, I'm not on X. I'm not on these other things. But on YouTube, where they constantly bash Pope Francis and Vatican II and praise SSPX as being the last bastion of conservatism, they're not talking about it, oddly enough. But it was just a couple days ago, it came out. Society of St. Pius X, SSPX priest, admits to years and years of sexual misconduct with minors. Now, I'm not going to read the whole report, but I'm going to read what a group called the SSPX Victims Collective, that have been around for years, victims of the SSPX priests, hundreds of these people, what they had to say about this. They said for the third time in 9 months, yeah, the third time in 9 months, you may not have heard this if you're watching Taylor Marshall or Kennedy Hall, but for the third time in 9 months, a priest of the Fraternity of St. Pius X finds himself before a French court for sexual assault or rape. Not to mention multiple proceedings abroad. The sentence in the Rostin case, I guess his name was Father Rostin, is expected to be passed in early June. So he's already admitted to being guilty. We're just waiting on his sentencing. And then it goes on, the SSPX is a traditional group. This is a Catholic News Agency article. The SSPX is a traditionalist group founded by Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre in 1970 that has an irregular canonical, I told you that. The group is not overseen by the Catholic Church or any diocese. So they're free. They don't have the Catholic Church overseeing them. They won't accept discipline from the Catholic Church or any diocese. They're just on their own. They're not part of the Catholic Church. In 2020, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, I remember this, KBI launched a multi-year investigation, and they have 188 suspects right now they're investigating. This is Kansas, and this is where a lot of money is in Kansas. And I'm not going to go real deep in there because there's so much I want to say, but check out Christine Niles' reports on the SSPX cover-up and abuse in Kansas, St. Mary's Church and School. It's horrific what these SSPX evil priests have done. It's horrific. And but it didn't start there. You know where it started? Marcel Lefebvre, the excommunicated Catholic, who Taylor Marshall and Kennedy Hall said is a saint. They believe he's a saint. And Taylor Marshall said the guy who excommunicated him, St. John Paul II, is only a saint. These are Taylor Marshall's words, because Pope Francis wanted to canonize Vatican II. He's not a saint because of anything godly he did. This is Taylor Marshall. Look at his things about what he has to say about Pope St. John Paul II. So they bash true saints and call an excommunicated Catholic a saint. So Marcel Lefebvre, after he was excommunicated, was very fond of this gay homosexual priest called Father Carlos Urgati. And Father Carlos Urgati was accused of being a homo predator priest. Other priests went to Lefebvre and told him this. He got rid of those priests, moved them out of the area, demoted them, then promoted his friend, his gay friend, Carlos Urgati, and told Bishop Williamson, watch him like a hawk. Now, Bishop Williamson was the one who ordained him. So they protected this guy until finally took years. 2002, he was convicted of abuse. So Carlos Urgati. So it's SSPX has always been full of homo predator priests. In Africa, I'll read a short report. What happened in Africa? Horrible. Taking advantage of the poor. That's what a lot of these pedos do. They take advantage of poor people because they have a lot of money. SSPX is loaded with money. They think they can do anything. This is from the LaCroix newspaper. It's from October 2022. Said, in the meantime, Father Patrick Grosch, a priest ordained in 1976, arrived in Gabon this is in Africa, in 1986 to establish the SSPX Foundation in Africa. Another extremely close friend of Archbishop Lefebvre, he remained there until 2008. Former students of, Joaquin Afri's investigative report includes the testimony of many abused children, now adults, who say Groch, this good friend of Lefebvre, sexually abused them. Former students also say Father Damien Carlisle, a priest who was in Gabon from 91 to 2000, sexually abused them. The Association Aid to Victims of Religious Movements in Europe and Their Families published a black book of the SSPX in 2019 that pointed to the facts of sexual assault. Because according to the journalists, because they're in a poor country, these poor kids, the SSPX paid everybody off and there were no charges filed. But again, Christine Niles goes deep into the SSPX African abuse, and Lord willing, I'm going to invite her on, and hopefully she'll accept, and she can break it down much better than I am. But my point is this: never go against the church, because you know what? This small group is outside of the Catholic Church, and all they're doing is attacking the Catholic Church. And the Bible makes it very clear. It's evil. Marcel Lefebvre started the SSPX based on rebellion. 1 Samuel 15:23 says, "For a sin of divination is rebellion." Basically, the occult. This is demonic. Divination is from the demons. And arrogance, and these people are very arrogant, thinking that they know better than the Pope. They know better than the bishops. And arrogance is the crime of idolatry. And they idolize this guy, Lefebvre. You hear him talk about Lefebvre like he's a god. It's disgusting. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord in turn has rejected you. Then Paul reminds us, Ephesians 6:12. "For our struggle is not with flesh and blood, but with the principalities, with the powers, with the world rulers of this present darkness, with the evil spirits in the heavens." And if you want to know if you're listening to someone that is committing the sin of divination, some versions say the sin of witchcraft, rebellion, never go against the church. The church is very clear in its teachings. We don't hide nothing like the cults. Everything we teach is in the open. Between the Catechism of the Catholic Church and the Code of Canon Law, you can find everything we believe. Canon Law 1373 is clear. One who publicly, so if you're on YouTube, I would say you're public, either stirs up hostilities or hatred among subjects against the Apostolic See or against an ordinary on account of some act of ecclesiastical power or ministry, or incites subjects to disobey them, is to be punished by an interdict or by other just penalties. So if you're listening to someone who's stirring up hatred towards the Pope or his bishops, you need to stop. You need to unsubscribe, shut that guy off. This is poison to your soul. But the good news is Jesus promised Peter that the gates of hell will not prevail against his church. And you see how under Pope Francis, our church has become more orthodox and conservative. Our priests are very conservative and orthodox. Our young priests coming out of seminary are the most conservative priests we've ever had. And you see the sexual crisis is over in the Catholic Church. And if you're thinking about joining one of these cults like SSPX or Vigano's new cult, which they're actually, they broke away from SSPX because they are sedevacantist. They don't believe there's a pope. There's no pope, according to Vigano, the guy who we believe is Pope Francis. He says it's an antichrist. This is according to Archbishop Vigano. But there's nothing new. Luther called the Pope at the time an antichrist. Lefebvre called Pope St. John Paul II an antichrist. This is what these people do. And the old Catholics, the old Catholic cult from the 1800s, there's still a few remnants of them left. They rejected Vatican I and said they were going to go back to tradition. And this is why they started doing the Mass in the vernacular, because they said in the first 3 centuries, the church gave Mass in the language of the people. And that was true, But they disobeyed the church because the church wanted it in Latin at the time. Now that the church wants it to be in the vernacular, the church decided it's time to go back to vernacular. The Vatican, the SSPX guys are rejecting that and saying, no, we're only going to do it in Latin. That's evil. Do it in the vernacular. So you see, nothing's new under the sun. And these cults will all pass away, but the Catholic Church will never, because that's the church, historically, the only church that could prove that Jesus Christ himself started it. You can look at Pope Francis all the way down to St. Peter. It was St. Peter, then it was Linus, then it was Cletus, then it was Clement, and an unbroken chain to Pope Francis. Every bishop in the Catholic Church can prove that he was ordained by a bishop who was ordained by a bishop, and it goes all the way down the line to one of the apostles. It's what we call apostolic succession. So if you belong to the Catholic Church, you belong to the actual church Jesus Christ started. But even more important than that, you could look at the doctrines of the first century and see that we had doctrinal succession, that we preached the same doctrine. Jesus said, this is my body, this is my flesh. The Protestant says, no, that's what he said, but he really meant a symbol. No, that's not what he meant. Jesus said what he meant and meant what he said. And the Catholic Church still teaches that first century doctrine that this is my blood and this is my body. And I can go down a list of every other doctrine has not changed in the Catholic Church. So I say this to tell you, stay Catholic. God bless.